What happens when a single moment of prejudice collides with a force of unimaginable authority? On Stellara Air's flagship Flight 815 from New York to London, a senior flight attendant decided she was the sole arbiter of who belonged in first class. She saw a black couple, Dr. Marcus and Dr. Alana Thorne, and saw only trespassers. She chose to humiliate them, to banish them, to make an example of them in front of a cabin of elite passengers. What she didn't know was that she wasn't just making an example of them. She was signing the death warrant for her career and triggering an investigation that would shake a multi-billion-dollar airline to its very core. This isn't just a story about karma. It's a story about what happens when the people you underestimate hold all the cards. Before we begin, comment where you are watching from today, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. Now let's get into it. The air in the Stellara Air Polaris Lounge at JFK was a carefully curated symphony of quiet success. The scent was a bespoke blend of white tea and sandalwood. The clinking of ice in heavy crystal glasses was muted, the conversations hushed and confidential. For Dr. Marcus Thorne and his wife, Dr. Alana Thorne, it was a rare and welcome pocket of tranquility. Marcus, a man whose calm demeanor masked a mind that could deconstruct the complex aerodynamics of a hypersonic vehicle, adjusted the cuff of his charcoal gray blazer. Beside him, Alana, a brilliant clinical researcher whose work was revolutionizing pediatric immunology, smiled as she scrolled through photos on her phone. They were celebrating their 15th anniversary. The trip to London was a meticulously planned escape: theater in the West End, dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants, and a week of simply being Marcus and Alana, not the high-powered professionals the world knew. "Remember our first trip?" Alana murmured, her eyes twinkling. "A leaky tent in the Poconos and a budget of $20 a day for food." Marcus chuckled, a deep, warm sound. "And it was the best trip of my life, until this one." He squeezed her hand. They were a portrait of quiet elegance and deep-seated affection. Their journey from humble beginnings to the pinnacle of their respective fields was a testament to their brilliance and shared work ethic. They had earned this, every last bit of it. Their boarding call for Flight 815 was announced, and they made their way to the gate. They were in seats 2A and 2B, the coveted forward-facing suites in the first-class cabin. As they presented their boarding passes, the gate agent, a pleasant young man named David, smiled warmly. "Welcome, Dr. and Dr. Thorne. We hope you have a wonderful flight. Happy anniversary." They stepped onto the jet bridge, the anticipation of the journey ahead bubbling within them. The moment they crossed the threshold into the aircraft, however, the atmosphere shifted. The cabin was bathed in a soft, ambient blue light, and the scent of warm towels was in the air. A junior flight attendant, a young woman with a nervous but genuine smile named Chloe, greeted them. "Welcome aboard." But it was the woman standing just behind her who commanded the space. She was the senior purser, her uniform immaculate, her blonde hair pulled back in a chignon so tight it seemed to defy gravity. Her name tag read Cynthia Rochester. Her smile was a thin, practiced line that did not reach her cold, assessing eyes. As her gaze fell upon Marcus and Alana, it lingered for a fraction of a second too long. The assessment was swift, silent, and dismissive. Marcus and Alana found their seats, spacious pods with polished wood-grain finishes and plush leather. They settled in, marveling at the luxury. Marcus was already picturing the two of them clinking champagne glasses as they soared over the Atlantic. Cynthia Rochester moved through the cabin with the predatory grace of a shark in its own aquarium. She offered pre-departure champagne to the man in 1A, a silver-haired executive named Mr. Sterling. She chatted amiably with a woman in 3D, a socialite draped in designer logos. When she reached Marcus and Alana, her practiced smile vanished completely. "Can I see your boarding passes again?" she asked, her tone clipped and devoid of any warmth. Slightly taken aback, Marcus retrieved them. "Of course, here you are." Cynthia took them, her eyes scanning the paper as if searching for a flaw. It was an unusually rigorous check for passengers who were already seated. "Thorn," she mumbled, looking from the past to their faces. The implication hung heavy in the air. "You can't be the Thorns." She handed them back without another word and moved on, skipping them entirely for the champagne service. Marcus caught Alana's eye. A small, almost imperceptible sigh escaped her lips. They had faced this 1,000 times before, the subtle, draining prejudice that questioned their presence in spaces they had more than earned the right to occupy. Usually, they let it slide. It was the price of admission, the tax on their success. "Don't let her ruin this, honey," Alana whispered, placing her hand on his. "She's not worth our energy." Marcus nodded, forcing a smile. "You're right, we're going to London." But the slight was a dissonant note in their anniversary symphony. Chloe, the junior flight attendant, noticed the omission. She approached them tentatively a few minutes later, her tray laden with orange juice and champagne. "Good evening. Would you care for a pre-departure beverage?" she asked, her voice soft. Before they could answer, Cynthia materialized beside her. "Chloe, I need you in the galley, now." Her voice was sharp, a reprimand disguised as an order. She gave Marcus and Alana a look that could curdle milk before steering the younger woman away. The champagne never arrived. The cabin doors were sealed. The safety demonstration began. But for Marcus and Alana Thorne, the sense of welcome had already evaporated. They were in a gilded cage under the watchful, hostile gaze of its self-appointed warden, Cynthia Rochester. The quiet luxury of the cabin now felt cold and alienating, and the flight had not yet even left the ground. As Flight 815 taxied toward the runway, the tension in seats 2A and 2B was a palpable entity. Marcus tried to engage Alana in conversation about the play they were going to see, but her responses were clipped. The initial joy of their anniversary trip was being steadily eroded by 1,000 tiny cuts. The real trouble began after takeoff, as the plane ascended through the clouds and the seatbelt sign pinged off. Cynthia Rochester began her full service, her movements a masterclass in performative hospitality for every passenger except the Thorns. She would laugh with Mr. Sterling, offer to personally stow a jacket for the woman in 3D, and inquire about flight connections for another passenger. When she passed Marcus and Alana, her face became a neutral, impenetrable mask. Dinner service was the next battleground. While other passengers were asked for their meal preferences with a warm smile, Cynthia stopped at their row and simply stated, "We have the sea bass and the fillet." Marcus, maintaining his composure, replied, "I'll have the fillet, please. Medium rare." "And for you?" she asked Alana, not quite making eye contact. "I'll have the sea bass, thank you," Alana said. Cynthia jotted it down on her tablet without a word and moved on. When the meals arrived, delivered by Chloe, who looked increasingly uncomfortable, Marcus's fillet was cooked well done to the point of being leathery. It was a small, petty act, but it was deliberate. He ate it without complaint, refusing to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. The breaking point came when Marcus decided to do some work. He was a lead safety inspector for the Federal Aviation Administration, a fact he never advertised. His work was his passion, and he often reviewed incident reports and new directives during flights. He pulled out his laptop, a standard-issue government device, and began to read. Cynthia was passing by, and her eyes snagged on the screen, which displayed a document with an official-looking header. She stopped abruptly. "Sir, I'm going to need you to put that away." Marcus looked up, confused. "Excuse me? We're at cruising altitude. Laptops are permitted." "It's not about the laptop. It's about what's on the screen," she said, her voice low and conspiratorial, yet loud enough for the surrounding passengers to hear. "I don't know what that is, but it looks like sensitive material. This is a private cabin." The sheer absurdity of the accusation left Marcus speechless for a moment. "This is my work. It's perfectly legal and secured." "I'm not comfortable with it," Cynthia insisted, crossing her arms. "And as the purser on this flight, my comfort and the security of my cabin are paramount." Alana could stay silent no longer. "Your comfort?" she interjected, her voice dangerously calm. My husband is working. He is not bothering anyone. The issue here seems to be your discomfort with us." The phrase, "my cabin," echoed in the air. The other passengers were now openly staring. Mr. Sterling lowered his newspaper. The influencer in 4A discreetly angled her phone, perhaps sensing drama worth recording. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice," Cynthia said, her eyes flashing with a sense of righteous authority. "There's no need to become aggressive." The word aggressive was a classic dog whistle, and Alana felt a hot surge of anger. "The only person being aggressive here is you. You have treated us with contempt since the moment we stepped onto this plane. You skipped our drink order, you tampered with my husband's meal, and now you're inventing baseless accusations." Cynthia's face hardened into a mask of indignation. "How dare you? I have been a flight attendant for 22 years. I know how to do my job, and I know when something is not right." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a hiss. "I've seen it 100 times. People using fake credentials or stolen points to get into first class where they don't belong. You've been on edge since you boarded." This was it. The subtext was now text. The prejudice was laid bare for the entire cabin to see. Marcus closed his laptop with a quiet, deliberate click. He unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up, his 6'2" frame seeming to shrink the already spacious cabin. He was not an intimidating man by nature, but when he focused his full analytical attention on someone, it was with an intensity that could be unnerving. "Miss Rochester," he began, his voice even and devoid of emotion, "you are making a series of grave errors. You have profiled us. You have accused us of what exactly? Of being in seats we paid for? Of working on a laptop? You are now fabricating a story about stolen points." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I would like you to produce the manifest for this flight and verify our names and our ticket numbers right here, right now. Then, I would like you to apologize to my wife." The demand was reasonable, logical, and utterly devastating to Cynthia's narrative. She was cornered. Her authority was being challenged not with anger, but with cold, hard facts, and she couldn't stand it. "I will do no such thing," she snapped, her composure finally cracking. "You are creating a disturbance. You are a security risk. I have had enough." She turned on her heel. "I'm getting the captain." As she stormed toward the cockpit, a heavy silence fell over the first-class cabin. Alana looked at Marcus, her heart pounding. This was no longer about a ruined anniversary trip. This was a public humiliation, a professional confrontation that had escalated beyond anything they had ever experienced. The flight was 30,000 feet over the Atlantic, and they were trapped in a situation spiraling rapidly out of control. The walk to the cockpit felt, to Cynthia Rochester, like a vindication. She wasn't just a flight attendant. She was the guardian of a certain world order, and the Thorns had violated it. Her mind was a whirlwind of self-justifying thoughts. They were aggressive. He was looking at suspicious documents. She raised her voice. Every thought cemented her belief that she was the hero of this story, protecting her cabin from interlopers. She knocked on the cockpit door. A moment later, Captain Richard Evans opened it. He was a veteran pilot in his late 50s, with a weathered face and an air of weary command. He had flown with Cynthia for years and trusted her implicitly. She was, in his eyes, the consummate professional who ran the tightest ship in the fleet. "What's going on, Cynthia?" he asked, seeing the storm on her face. "Sounds a little tense out there." "Rick, we have a problem," she said, her voice a carefully modulated blend of urgency and control. "It's the couple in 2A and 2B. They've been disruptive from the moment they boarded. I suspect their tickets are fraudulent, likely purchased with stolen miles. When I tried to discreetly question them, they became hostile. The man was viewing sensitive documents, and the woman became aggressive. I feel they are a security risk to the flight." She delivered the report with practiced efficiency, layering her subjective feelings with official-sounding jargon like disruptive, hostile, and security risk. She knew these were trigger words that would demand a captain's intervention. Captain Evans sighed. The last thing he wanted on a transatlantic run was a passenger dispute. Fraudulent tickets, are you sure? I have a gut feeling, Rick. 22 years in this business, my gut is never wrong. They just don't fit. And their reaction was way over the top. I think we need to remove them from the first-class cabin, for the comfort and safety of the other passengers. Trusting his senior purser's judgment over the unseen, unheard passengers, Captain Evans nodded. All right, let's go sort this out. I want this flight quiet. He emerged from the cockpit, Cynthia trailing behind him like a loyal vizier. His presence immediately changed the atmosphere. The captain's uniform was a symbol of ultimate authority on an aircraft. Passengers instinctively deferred to it. He walked down the aisle and stopped at row 2, his face a stern, unreadable mask. Folks, I'm Captain Evans. I understand there's been some sort of disturbance. Marcus stood to meet his gaze. Captain, there has been a misunderstanding, orchestrated entirely by your purser. Sir, what I've been told, Evans cut in, his tone brooking no argument, is that you and your wife have been causing a disturbance and are refusing to comply with crew instructions. On my aircraft, crew instructions are not optional. The dismissal was total. He hadn't asked for their side of the story. He hadn't reviewed any facts. He had heard Cynthia's report, and that was enough. The verdict was already in. Captain, with all due respect, that is a complete mischaracterization, Alana said, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and disbelief. We have been harassed by this woman from the moment we boarded. We are asking for basic respect. What I'm asking for is a peaceful flight to London, Captain Evans retorted. Now I have two options. I can have you both move to seats in the main cabin for the remainder of the flight to de-escalate the situation. Or I can turn this plane around and have you met by Port Authority at JFK. The choice is yours. The ultimatum was a public shaming. The other passengers stared, some with pity, some with a grim satisfaction. To be banished from first class was a social demotion, a declaration that you did not belong. To be threatened with arrest was a terrifying escalation. Marcus looked at his wife, whose face was a mixture of hurt and defiance. He looked at Captain Evans's implacable expression. He looked at Cynthia Rochester, who was watching with a triumphant smirk. He knew that arguing further was futile. They were not seen as passengers with a legitimate complaint. They were seen as the problem. His mind, trained to assess risk and follow protocol, made a split-second decision. Staying on this aircraft under the command of a captain who had already judged them and a purser who was openly hostile was an unacceptable risk. Captain, Marcus said, his voice now devoid of any warmth, as cold and precise as a surgical instrument. We will not be moving to the main cabin, and you will not be turning this plane around. We will be deplaning. The statement caught Captain Evans off guard. They were an hour into the flight over the ocean. Deplaning? That's not an option, sir. We are in the air. I am aware of our geographical position, Marcus replied evenly. I am formally requesting that you return to the gate at John F. Kennedy International Airport. My wife and I will disembark. A murmur went through the cabin. Returning to the gate was a massive, costly disruption. It meant dumping fuel, filing a new flight plan, and delaying hundreds of people for hours. It was a nuclear option. Captain Evans stared at Marcus, trying to understand what kind of person would make such a demand. He saw a calm, resolute black man in a blazer, not a hysterical passenger. This wasn't the behavior he expected. It was a move of calculated power, not petulance. Sir, that's a highly unusual request that will inconvenience everyone on this plane, Evans said, his own authority now feeling slightly less absolute. The inconvenience has already occurred, Marcus stated. It was caused by your crew. We will not continue a 7-hour flight in this environment. We are exercising our right as paying customers who have been mistreated to terminate our journey with your airline. Return to the gate. He sat down, his posture final. Alana, trusting her husband's judgment completely, did the same. They did not raise their voices. They did not argue. They simply waited. Captain Evans was in a bind. The passenger wasn't being hysterical. He was making a formal, albeit insane, request. Denying it could open up a new world of liability if something else were to happen. Reluctantly, with a frustrated glare at Cynthia, he turned back to the cockpit. A few minutes later, the intercom crackled. "Folks, this is your captain speaking. Due to an unforeseen passenger issue, we will be returning to our gate at JFK. We apologize for the delay, and will provide more information once we are on the ground." A collective groan filled the aircraft. Cynthia Rochester looked stunned. This was not the outcome she had wanted. She had wanted the Thorns humbled and moved to the back of the bus, not this dramatic, expensive reversal. As the plane began its slow, ponderous turn back toward New York City, Marcus Thorn took his wife's hand. The anniversary trip was ruined. Their evening was a nightmare of public humiliation. But in the cold, clear calculus of his mind, a new plan was forming. The line had been crossed. Protocol had been violated. And there would be consequences. The mood on Flight 815 during its return to JFK was funereal. The other first-class passengers shot angry glares toward the Thorns, blaming them for the massive inconvenience. The flight crew moved about sullenly, the celebratory atmosphere of a transatlantic departure replaced by a grim sense of failure. Cynthia Rochester avoided their row entirely, her earlier triumph curdling into anxiety. When the plane finally reconnected with the jet bridge, the door was opened by a flustered-looking gate supervisor, a woman named Linda. Captain Evans's voice came over the intercom, dripping with passive aggression. "We are now ready for the disembarking passengers in seats 2A and 2B. Marcus and Alana stood, gathered their belongings with quiet dignity, and walked toward the open door, enduring the hostile stares of an entire airplane. They didn't look back. As they stepped onto the jet bridge, Linda, the gate supervisor, approached them, her face a mask of professional frustration. "Sir, ma'am, I don't know what happened on there, but this delay is going to cost the airline hundreds of thousands of dollars and create a logistical nightmare." Marcus stopped and looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Linda, I assure you, the cost of this delay is a minor rounding error compared to the cost of what is about to happen to Stellara Air." He pulled out his phone. He didn't call customer service, he didn't call a lawyer. He scrolled through his contacts to a number marked simply NOC. Alana watched him, knowing exactly who he was calling. The calm, professorial demeanor she loved was now overlaid with something else, the cool, detached authority of a man about to initiate a protocol with devastating consequences. "This is Inspector Thorn, badge number 74 Alpha," Marcus said into the phone, his voice crisp and official. "I am with Dr. Alana Thorn. We are at JFK Gate C-42. We have just self-disembarked from Stellara Air Flight 815, New York to Heathrow. I am declaring an immediate Level 1 safety and compliance failure." There was a pause. Linda, the gate supervisor who had been about to protest further, froze. The term Inspector Thorn and the alphanumeric code that followed it were not civilian language. Her brain struggled to process what she was hearing. "The reason for the declaration," Marcus continued, his gaze fixed on the Stellara Air logo on the side of the plane, "is a complete breakdown in crew resource management, passenger profiling leading to a baseless security threat accusation, and a failure of the captain to follow fundamental investigation protocols before taking punitive action against passengers. The purser, Cynthia Rochester, and the captain, Richard Evans, created a hostile and unsafe environment. My full report will follow, but I want this aircraft grounded, effective immediately." He listened for a moment. "Correct. The entire aircraft. No one disembarks, no one boards. The flight crew is to be detained for interviews. I want a full ground team here in 30 minutes. Acknowledge." He hung up. The silence on the jet bridge was absolute. Linda stared at him, her mouth slightly agape. "Inspector, I don't understand." "Inspector for who?" Marcus reached into his blazer and pulled out a slim leather wallet. He didn't flash it. He opened it slowly and held it for her to see. Inside, behind a clear window, was a gold-rimmed credential with a holographic eagle. United States of America Department of Transportation, Federal Aviation Administration, Dr. Marcus Thorne, Lead Aviation Safety Inspector, LASI. The title seemed to hang in the air, electric and terrifying. Linda felt a cold dread wash over her. This wasn't a disgruntled passenger. This was the FAA. Not just the FAA, but a lead inspector. The kind of person who could shut down an airline with a single phone call. The kind of person who was currently shutting down her flight. Alana then produced her own credential. While hers was as a special consultant, her name was well known in aviation medical circles. She advised on the very regulations concerning crew fitness for duty and passenger well-being. "Linda," Marcus said, his voice calm again, but now carrying the immense weight of his authority. "My wife and I were on this flight conducting a random undercover operational audit. These are periodically performed to assess real-world compliance with federal regulations. What we experienced was not just poor customer service. It was a chain of failures that indicates a deep systemic problem at your airline." The gate supervisor's face had gone pale. The disruptive passengers who had caused a flight to turn around were actually federal inspectors conducting a secret audit. The nightmare she thought was ending was just beginning. The purser hadn't just insulted a customer. She had publicly humiliated a top FAA official. The captain hadn't just mishandled a complaint. He had failed a live test from the very body that granted him his license to fly. "Get on your radio," Marcus instructed, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "Inform Captain Evans that he is to remain in the cockpit and await instruction from FAA ground control. Inform Miss Rochester and the rest of the crew that they are not to leave the aircraft. Nobody is to use their personal cell phones. And get me the direct contact information for Stellara Air's chief operating officer. He and I are going to have a conversation before his airline becomes the lead story on the national news." Linda fumbled for her radio, her hands shaking. As she stammered out the instructions, the full, catastrophic reality of the situation began to dawn on everyone. On board the plane, Captain Evans would hear the transmission and feel his blood run cold. Cynthia Rochester, preparing her triumphant report about ejecting the problem passengers, would find herself a prisoner on her own aircraft, her world about to be systematically dismantled by the very people she had judged unworthy. The anniversary trip was over. The audit had begun. The call from JFK's Operations Center to Stellara Air's corporate headquarters in Atlanta was like a torpedo hitting a battleship below the waterline. It was 9 p.m. on a Friday, and most senior executives were at home, enjoying their weekends. That peace was irrevocably shattered. Daniel Fletcher, the executive vice president of North American operations, was a man who lived on a diet of stress and black coffee. When his phone rang with the emergency code from JFK, he answered with a sense of weary dread. "What is it?" he barked. The voice on the other end was panicked. "Mr. Fletcher, we have a situation with Flight 815. It returned to the gate." "I know that. I got the alert. Passenger issue. Get them rebooked and get the plane out of there. The delay is already costing a fortune," Fletcher snapped. "Sir, you don't understand," the operations manager said, his voice strained. "The passengers. They weren't just passengers. They were FAA. Undercover. A lead inspector, sir. Dr. Marcus Thorne. He's grounded the aircraft. He's detained the crew. He's asking for you." Fletcher went silent. The name Thorne didn't immediately register, but the titles lead inspector and FAA were all he needed to hear. An FAA grounding was not a slap on the wrist. It was a public execution. It signaled a failure so profound that the government had to physically step in and stop the operation. "Get me the CEO," Fletcher said, his voice now a strained whisper. "Get him now, and get me everything you have on what happened on that plane. I want passenger lists, crew files, cockpit voice recordings, everything. Go." Within minutes, a frantic high-level conference call was underway. Present were the CEO, Gerald Kensington, the head of the legal department, the VP of public relations, and Fletcher. The story that trickled in from the terrified ground staff at JFK was a corporate horror story. They learned the names: Senior Purser Cynthia Rochester and Captain Richard Evans. Fletcher pulled their files. Cynthia's record was, on the surface, exemplary in terms of performance reviews. She was efficient, punctual, and received commendations for her cabin management. But digging deeper into the sealed HR complaints, a different picture emerged. Over the past 5 years, there had been 7 informal complaints filed against her by junior colleagues and passengers. 3 of them specifically mentioned her hostile and discriminatory treatment of minority passengers. All had been dismissed by a mid-level manager as personality conflicts or unsubstantiated claims. The airline had chosen to protect its senior, experienced employee rather than investigate the smoke that was now a raging inferno. Captain Evans's file was clean, but for one detail. He was known as an old-school pilot who trusted his senior crew implicitly and had little patience for passenger issues, often referring to them as cargo that complains. He was a man who deferred, and tonight he had deferred to the spectacularly wrong person. Back on Flight 815, the atmosphere had transformed from annoyance to outright fear. The passengers were finally allowed to deplane, told only that the flight was canceled due to crew operational issues. They were furious, demanding compensation and answers, but the crew was not allowed to leave. Cynthia Rochester, Captain Evans, and the rest of the flight attendants were confined to the first-class cabin they had departed from hours earlier. It now felt like an interrogation room. 2 stern-faced FAA officials, dispatched by Marcus, had boarded the plane and were standing guard. Cynthia's arrogance had evaporated, replaced by a gnawing panic. She tried to piece together what was happening. An inspector? Undercover? It seemed impossible, like something from a movie. She had built her career on her infallible judgment, her ability to size people up and maintain the proper atmosphere in her cabin. The idea that her judgment was not just flawed, but had triggered a federal incident, was too catastrophic to fully comprehend. Captain Evans sat in the pilot's seat, the cockpit door open, staring at his instruments. He had replayed the conversation in his head a dozen times. He hadn't questioned Cynthia. He had threatened the passenger, sided with his crew, and made a decision based on incomplete, biased information. It was a textbook example of poor crew resource management, a failure of the very principles he was supposed to champion. He had allowed his purser's personal prejudice to become his command decision. He had failed the ultimate test without even knowing he was being tested. Chloe, the junior flight attendant, sat in a jump seat, quietly crying. She knew what she had seen. She knew the thorns had been targeted. But she had been too intimidated by Cynthia to intervene. Her silence now felt like complicity, and she was terrified of the consequences. The first official interviews began right there on the grounded aircraft. A third FAA agent, a no-nonsense woman named Maria Sandoval, came aboard. She interviewed each crew member separately, starting with Chloe. In tears, Chloe recounted everything: Cynthia's dismissive glance, the deliberate snub with the champagne, the condescending tone, the confrontation over the laptop, and the false accusations she made to the captain. Her testimony was damning, a clear chronological account of escalating hostility and prejudice. When it was Cynthia's turn, she was a wreck. She tried to stick to her story, painting the thorns as aggressive and suspicious. But under Sandoval's relentless fact-based questioning, her narrative crumbled. So, Miss Rochester, you claim Dr. Thorne's laptop displayed sensitive material. What material was it? I don't know for sure. It just looked official and he was hiding it. He was working in his seat, correct? Where other passengers work on their laptops. Yes, but... And you claim they became hostile. Can you quote the specific hostile language they used? Cynthia faltered. Well, she raised her voice. She said I was harassing them. Was her accusation accurate, Miss Rochester? Had you in fact been treating them differently from other passengers? No, absolutely not. I treat all my passengers the same. It was a lie, and everyone in the room knew it. The corporate cataclysm was in full swing, and Cynthia Rochester was at its epicenter. The shock waves were just beginning to radiate outwards, threatening to swamp the entire airline. The grounding of a flagship international flight was merely the opening salvo. In the days that followed, Stellara Air found itself at the mercy of a full-scale FAA audit, triggered and personally overseen by Dr. Marcus Thorne. This was not a routine checkup. It was a corporate colonoscopy, and the findings were malignant. Marcus was no longer just the wronged passenger. He was the embodiment of the regulatory body that held Stellara's fate in its hands. He operated with a chillingly impersonal professionalism. His rage and humiliation were channeled into a relentless pursuit of fact. He and his team descended upon Stellara's Atlanta headquarters like a conquering army. The investigation branched into three main fronts: human resources and training, flight operations, and corporate oversight. Human resources and training. Marcus's team subpoenaed every complaint filed against Cynthia Rochester. The 7 informal complaints were just the tip of the iceberg. They found 2 more formal complaints, one from a black family and another from an Asian businessman, that had been settled with travel vouchers and non-disclosure agreements. The airline's legal team had prioritized silencing the problem over solving it. The HR manager who had dismissed the complaints was found to have a close personal friendship with Cynthia. It was a clear case of institutional protectionism. Next, they audited Stellara's diversity and anti-discrimination training modules. They were a joke. The training consisted of a 20-minute online video that employees clicked through once a year, followed by a simple quiz. There were no interactive sessions, no scenario-based learning, and no mechanism to measure its effectiveness. When Marcus interviewed the head of training, the executive admitted under pressure that the program was a check-the-box exercise designed to satisfy the most basic legal requirements at the lowest possible cost. Flight operations. Captain Richard Evans's career was put under a microscope. While he had a good safety record, the investigators discovered a pattern in his flight reports. He had an unusually high number of incidents logged as uncooperative passenger events, nearly all of which were initiated by Cynthia Rochester when she was his purser. No other purser he flew with had a comparable record. It was clear that he had enabled her behavior for years, creating a command structure on his flights where the purser's biases went unchecked and were enforced with the captain's authority. The cockpit voice recorder from Flight 815 was analyzed. It captured the conversation between Cynthia and Captain Evans perfectly. It revealed how she had framed the Thornes as a security threat from the outset, and how he had accepted her version of events without a single question. There was no mention of verifying their tickets or reviewing the situation impartially. It was a damning piece of evidence that showed a complete breakdown of professional protocol. This was where the investigation struck gold, revealing a corporate culture that prioritized profit margins and on-time departures over everything else, including passenger rights and federal regulations. Marcus's team discovered that Stellara had recently implemented a bonus structure for senior pursers that rewarded them for minimizing in-flight compensation payouts, like drink vouchers or miles for service failures. This incentivized employees like Cynthia to deny passenger complaints rather than address them, fostering a culture of dismissal. If a passenger was deemed a problem, the easiest course of action was to label them disruptive. The PR and legal departments had a codified playbook for handling discrimination claims. Deny, delay, dismiss. Deny the accusation, delay the investigation until the passenger gives up, and ultimately dismiss the claim with a low-ball offer contingent on a signed NDA. This strategy had saved the company millions in the short term, but it had created a festering wound of unresolved issues and unaddressed bigotry. The weight of the findings was staggering. It wasn't just one rogue flight attendant. It was a systemic cultural rot. The airline's own policies and lack of oversight had created the perfect environment for a person like Cynthia Rochester to thrive, and for a captain like Richard Evans to become complicit. As the audit progressed, the story inevitably leaked to the press. An investigative journalist at a major newspaper got a tip from a disgruntled Stellara employee. The headline was explosive. FAA inspector and wife forcibly removed from first class in racism incident. Stellara Air under federal investigation. The public backlash was immediate and brutal. Stellara's stock price plummeted by 15% in 2 days, wiping out over $1 billion in market value. Social media erupted with boycott calls. Viral videos emerged from other passengers who had suffered similar treatment on their flights. The story of Dr. Marcus and Dr. Alana Thorne became a symbol of systemic racism in the travel industry. Stellara Air's CEO, Gerald Kensington, was forced to issue a public statement. His initial lawyer-vetted apology was weak and mealy-mouthed, speaking of an isolated incident and a failure to meet our high standards. It only fueled the fire. Marcus Thorne, watching the press conference from his temporary office at Stellara headquarters, shook his head. They still didn't get it. They thought this was a PR problem that could be managed. He was there to ensure they understood it was a fundamental operational crisis that had to be rebuilt from the ground up. The unraveling was not yet complete. The real karma was yet to be delivered. The main boardroom at Stellara Air's Atlanta headquarters was a chamber of corporate power, designed to impress and intimidate. A single, colossal mahogany table polished to a mirror shine stretched across its length. The chairs were upholstered in expensive black leather, and one entire wall was a floor-to-ceiling window, offering a panoramic view of the city skyline. For years, this room had been a stage for celebrating record profits and strategic triumphs. On this day, it felt like a mausoleum. Seated around the table were the remnants of Stellara's leadership. The beleaguered CEO, Gerald Kensington, his face ashen. The board of directors, a collection of grim-faced men and women who looked as if they were awaiting a verdict. And a phalanx of the company's highest-paid lawyers, their usual confident swagger, replaced by a tense, funereal silence. At the head of the table, where the CEO usually sat, stood Dr. Marcus Thorne. He was not there as a guest or a petitioner. He was there as the chief prosecutor, judge, and jury. Beside him stood Maria Sandoval from his team, and a screen behind them displayed the seal of the Federal Aviation Administration. Marcus wore the same simple, elegant charcoal blazer he had worn on the flight, a subtle but powerful reminder of where this all began. He held no papers, his command of the facts absolute. "Good morning," Marcus began, his voice calm and measured, yet it seemed to absorb all the oxygen in the room. "For the past 4 weeks, my team has conducted a comprehensive operational audit of Stellara Air, triggered by the events of Flight 815. We are now prepared to present our findings and the subsequent FAA enforcement actions." He gestured to the screen where the first slide appeared. It was a picture of Cynthia Rochester's smiling corporate headshot. "Let's begin with the catalyst. Miss Cynthia Rochester, a 22-year veteran of your airline." Marcus's gaze swept across the board members. "Our investigation uncovered a pattern of behavior that was not just unprofessional, but predatory. We have documented 9 separate formal and informal complaints of discriminatory behavior filed against Miss Rochester over the last 6 years, 7 of which were directed at racial minorities. Your Human Resources Department, specifically Manager Mark Peterson, a documented personal friend of Miss Rochester, dismissed, settled, or buried every single one." He clicked to the next slide, which showed redacted copies of the complaints. This wasn't a secret. It was a protected pattern. You didn't have a rogue employee, Mr. Kensington. You had a liability that your own system chose to incubate. He then moved on to Captain Evans. "The command authority on an aircraft is absolute. Captain Richard Evans abdicated that authority to Miss Rochester's prejudice. We have the cockpit voice recording. There will be a formal hearing, but I will give you the summary now." The lawyers shifted uncomfortably. Marcus recited the exchange from memory. Miss Rochester stated, "I have a gut feeling, Rick. They just don't fit." Not once did Captain Evans suggest verifying the passengers' tickets. Not once did he seek to speak with my wife and me privately to ascertain the facts. His first action was to present an ultimatum based entirely on the biased, unsubstantiated claims of his purser. This is not a mere lapse in judgment. It is a catastrophic failure of the most fundamental principle of aviation command: crew resource management. Finally, he turned his focus to the corporation itself. And why did this happen? Because your corporate culture created the fertile ground for it. Your bonus structure rewarding pursers for minimizing in-flight service complaints. Your legal strategy of deny, delay, dismiss for discrimination claims. Your laughably inadequate check-the-box diversity training. You did not have an incident. You have a disease. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the suffocatingly quiet room. The events on Flight 815 were not an anomaly. They were the inevitable symptom of that disease. My wife and I were simply the ones who happened to be in the position to force the diagnosis. With that, he outlined the reckoning. It was not a negotiation. It was a directive. For Cynthia Rochester, the fallout was absolute. Her termination from Stellara was the first predictable step. 2 weeks later, she found herself in a sterile government hearing room facing the FAA certification board. Her union-appointed lawyer argued that a single mistake shouldn't erase a 22-year career. But the FAA, armed with Marcus's exhaustive report, presented the undeniable pattern of complaints. They showed that her actions on Flight 815 weren't a mistake. They were the culmination of a career spent enforcing her own prejudices. When the board voted unanimously and permanently to revoke her flight attendant certificate, the decision was read aloud. A witness described Cynthia staring blankly at the table, the color draining from her face. As she realized her identity, the queen bee of the first-class cabin had been legally and irrevocably stripped from her. The last press photo of her showed a haggard woman pushing a shopping cart, her face a mask of bitterness forever grounded. Captain Richard Evans faced his own professional execution. After being fired, he was summoned to a similar hearing for his pilot's license. Unlike Cynthia, he was deeply remorseful. He spoke of his years of service, his clean safety record, his fatal error in trusting his crew member without question. But the board was unmoved. A senior member, a veteran pilot herself, looked at him with disdain. "Captain," she said, "you let a passenger's race filtered through your purser's bias make a command decision for you. You flew that plane back to JFK not for a safety reason, but to placate an employee's bigotry. You didn't just fail Dr. Thorne, you failed the 4 stripes on your uniform." His license was suspended for a year, but everyone in the industry knew it was a career-ending judgment. No major airline would ever trust him in the left seat again. The weight of his failure would follow him for the rest of his life, a constant reminder of the moment he chose complicity over command. The HR manager, Mark Peterson, was fired for gross negligence. A public statement from Stellara named him directly as a key figure in the systemic failure, effectively blacklisting him from the corporate world. His attempt to protect his friend had cost him his own livelihood and reputation. The judgment against Stellara Air. The fine of $27.5 million was a headline-grabbing number, but the true punishment lay within the legally binding consent decree, which Marcus Thorne's team had drafted with surgical precision. It was a public humiliation and a complete corporate restructuring dictated by the federal government. The decree's mandates were crushing. The training overhaul was a logistical and financial nightmare. Stellara had to contract a world-renowned DEI firm, at a cost of over $15 million, to design and implement an immersive 3-day training program. Every single one of its 20,000 pilots and flight attendants, from the most junior new hire to the most senior veteran, was required to complete it within 18 months. Flights had to be canceled, and schedules were thrown into chaos as thousands of employees were pulled from duty to attend these mandatory sessions on racial bias, de-escalation, and cultural sensitivity. The decree also established the Independent Office of Passenger Advocacy within Stellara, funded by the airline but reporting only to the FAA. This office, led by a former federal judge, had the power to investigate any complaint, subpoena any employee, and recommend disciplinary action, up to and including termination, which the airline was legally bound to carry out. For the first time, Stellara's employees knew there was a power greater than their direct supervisors. The forced resignation of CEO Gerald Kensington was a brutal affair. The board, seeing the stock in free fall and the brand in tatters, gave him a simple choice: resign immediately or be fired for cause. His tearful televised farewell speech, in which he spoke of taking responsibility, was seen by the public as the hollow words of a leader who had only acted once his hand was forced. He was replaced by an outsider, a woman known for her expertise in corporate turnarounds, who began her tenure with a public apology tour. The Stellara Air scandal sent a shockwave through the entire industry. Panicked executives at rival airlines launched their own internal audits, terrified of finding their own Cynthia Rochesters and Mark Petersons. The case became a mandatory module in all flight attendant training academies, a stark lesson titled The Thorn Directive. The balance of power in the cabin had subtly shifted. Passengers, now more aware of their rights, felt emboldened to report mistreatment, and flight crews, aware of the new level of scrutiny, knew that their actions were under a microscope like never before. Weeks later, long after the media storm had moved on, Marcus and Alana sat in their quiet living room. The light outside was fading. The anniversary trip to London had never happened. In its place had been weeks of interviews, reports, and reliving the most humiliating experience of their lives. On the coffee table sat a lavish gift basket from Stellara's new CEO, along with a letter offering them complimentary first-class travel for life, anywhere in the world. Alana picked up the letter and read it again, a sad smile on her face. "A lifetime of free flights," she said softly, as if that's what this was about. Marcus looked at his wife, the brilliant, strong woman who had been made to feel like an intruder in a space she had earned 1,000 times over. He felt a pang of the anger he had so carefully controlled throughout the investigation. It was never about the champagne or the seat, he said. It was about the assumption that we didn't belong, that our presence had to be an error. He took out his own laptop and typed a short, polite email to the new CEO. He thanked her for the offer, but formally declined it. He wrote, "Dr. Thorne and I do not seek compensation for the treatment we received. We seek a permanent change in the culture that allowed it to happen. Your adherence to the consent decree will be the only acceptable apology." He hit send. There was no triumph, no gloating, just a quiet finality. Alana put her head on his shoulder. "Do you think it will make a difference?" "I think the story will," he replied, putting his arm around her. "The story of what happened. It will make someone in a uniform think twice before they make a judgment. It might give a junior flight attendant the courage to speak up. It might make a captain pause and ask one more question. That's where the change happens. Not in a boardroom, but in those small human moments." Their anniversary had been ruined, but their shared purpose had been forged anew in the crucible of that flight. Alana would go on to lead a national task force on passenger rights, while Marcus's work within the FAA would be informed by a profound personal understanding of the people his regulations were meant to protect. They had faced down ugliness and prejudice, not with rage, but with a quiet, unyielding competence. They had turned their humiliation into a lever and moved an entire industry, ensuring that the sky would be just a little bit safer and a little more just for everyone who dared to fly. The story of Marcus and Alana Thorne is a powerful reminder that the fight for dignity and respect can happen anywhere, even in the first-class cabin of a transatlantic flight. It shows us how the quiet authority of competence and integrity can bring a corrupt and arrogant system to its knees. Cynthia Rochester and Captain Evans didn't just have a bad day. They were the products of a corporate culture that allowed prejudice to fester. The karma they faced wasn't mystical, it was procedural, a direct consequence of underestimating two people who happened to be the guardians of the very rules they were breaking. If this story of justice and accountability resonated with you, if you believe that everyone deserves to be treated with respect regardless of who they are, then please help us share this message. Hit that like button, share this video with your friends and family, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories where karma delivers the final verdict. Thank you for listening.